What's up, guys? Leighton here for UFC Gambling Addicts. Back in 2020 for this first pay-per-view card, first card of the year. The wait is nearly over. We have Conor McGregor versus Donald Cerrone. So, for the first 2 weeks of this break, we had Christmas, we had the New Year, all of that stuff kept us entertained. But for the last few days, this last 4 or 5 days, something has felt so missing, just felt missing, and that's MMA. So I'm glad the wait is nearly over. Have a really, really decent card to come back to. A lot of matchups on this card are just really, really tough picks to make, but it's what I love to do. I love to break down fights, make picks, and this is a good card. I'm really looking forward to it. So a few things before we get into the card. Number one, if you enjoyed that intro that I made specially for this card, let me know in the comments. Number two, I've recently done a Macy Barber highlight edit video. I'm sure a few of you have seen it, but if you haven't seen it and you have a spare minute, please go and check that video out. It took me a good week and a half to make that video. I'm pretty proud of it, but yeah, check that video out and let me know too. And also a quick shout out to Just Bleed MMA. Now, this guy I feel deserves way more credit than he's getting on his channel. Channel really started to pick up towards the end of last year, but this is a guy who's going nowhere. So if you want to check out a channel you haven't seen or heard of, I'm sure some of you have seen this guy and do listen to this guy. He's awesome to listen to. Check him out. Just Bleed MMA. This guy, real passion, real passion for MMA. Gets extremely animated in his breakdowns, his predictions, and you can't hide that kind of stuff, you know. When you get animated like that, it comes from passion. It's clear to see he has a lot of passion for this sport. So if you have a spare minute, check him out. Let's get into this pay-per-view card. Okay, starting the card, we have Sabina, Colombian Queen, Mazo versus JJ Aldrich. And we'll start with the Colombian. So Sabina Mazo comes into this fight 1-1 inside the UFC. Primarily a kickboxer. In my opinion, she's a much better kicker than a puncher. And I say that because there's not really too much power to her game. Prior to the UFC, a couple of really nice high kick finishes, but so far in the UFC, what I'm seeing is a much better kicker than a puncher. She does use her jabs, but that's mainly to set up the kicks. That's where she's dangerous. So looking at her debut against Marina Moroz, I took Marina in that fight, slight underdog, and Sabina just really didn't perform in that fight. You know, she was basically grappled, couldn't really get her game going. Her boxing didn't look too powerful. It wasn't too good. But then you look at her return fight against Shana Dobson, where she was able to grapple, show improvements in that area. That was pleasing to see. So from what I'm seeing, she's a kickboxer, not really powerful, but she has got good technique with her kicks. The opponent, JJ Aldrich. Now, this girl is more experienced. I believe she comes into this fight 4 wins, 2 losses inside the UFC. And she's a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, which is a little bit surprising because when you watch JJ Aldrich fight, she's really not kicking too much. You know, she's using her boxing. She does kick here and there, but for a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, who's been performing that art for the majority of their life, you'd expect her to be way more kick heavy than what she is inside the octagon. From what I'm seeing in JJ Aldrich, at least in her 6 UFC fights, is a decent boxer. You know, she was able to drop Macy Barber. She's had a couple performances that I felt have been very decent from JJ Aldrich. You look at her return fight against Lauren Mueller, which, you know, Lauren Mueller isn't the best name out there, but, you know, decent performance to return after that loss to Macy Barber. Against Poliana Viana, which was prior to Macy Barber, performed very well in that fight too. So very good matchup to start the card. And I always like fights that are hard to predict, because ultimately what that shows us is this is a really competitive fight, and that's what we want. You know, that's what we get with MMA and the UFC. That's what we get, really competitive matchups that can go one way or the other. So if I'm looking at this fight, if I'm trying to predict this fight, I do see at least 90% of a kickboxing battle. And like I said, JJ Aldrich really doesn't kick too much. I think Sabina Mazo is going to be the girl landing those kicks from the outside. I think JJ has to get dirty in there, has to get real close, look to dirty box, potentially look for a takedown up against the fence. Really, really good matchup and a hard fight to predict. But I'm going to stick with Sabina Mazo, and I'm going to take Sabina Mazo via decision. Now, just a heads up, I haven't checked any odds whatsoever on this card, so I'm going to be finding out with you guys for the first time. Sabina Mazo versus JJ Aldrich, -110, -115. That's exactly the way I feel. This is a really good matchup. I think it's going to be contested on the feet for the most part. And if it is, I still see a close battle, so I completely understand why those odds are exactly the same. I like it. It's perfect. It resembles the matchup the majority of us see here. So, yeah, either side I think is playable. JJ Aldrich has got the experience. She has fought good ladies inside the UFC. But Sabina Mazo does seem to be the better kicker. It's a tough one. I'm going to stick with Mazo, and at -115, it's worth a couple parlays. Second fight of the night, we have O'Day, the Jamaican sensation Osborne, versus Brian Boom Kelleher. We'll start with the Jamaican. So O'Day Osborne comes into this fight 8 wins, 2 losses as a pro. He's making his UFC debut by way of the Contender Series. If you hadn't seen his Contender Series fight, I believe he was a slight underdog, had a very, very impressive performance, was able to get an armbar finish, very, very impressive. So taking a look at O'Day's career so far, he's a very dangerous guy. He's got more submission wins than TKOs, which makes him exciting, because when I look at him fight, I don't see a grappler. I don't see a BJJ specialist. Now, he's getting most of his fights done via submission, but when I watch this guy stand, I see a really dangerous puncher. I see a dangerous, quick kickboxer. So, to see his submission game is the way he's getting these fights done. To see him have that threat to fall back on, that's pleasing. That's refreshing. I really like the look of this guy. I think his stand-up ability looks really good already. He's quick, powerful, and most of his opponents are looking to take him down, and he has an answer there. So that's nice to know that prior to the UFC, he's already showing us, look, I'm not just this guy who's going to be taken down and that's how guys are going to beat me. I'm going to submit you there. If you don't want to stand with me, I'm going to submit you. If you want to stand with me, I'm going to TKO you. That is the persona I'm seeing in this guy. Now the opponent, Brian Boom Kelleher, comes into this fight 3-3 inside the UFC. I believe he's been training in mixed martial arts for at least 10 plus years. I believe he started training in 2007. He's a brown belt in BJJ and naturally just a well-rounded guy. I really believe he has shown that so far in his UFC career. So taking a look at his debut, which was mid 2017 against Alcantara, big upset win, was able to get that fight done via submission. Then he went on to beat Damian Stasic and Henan Barral. Yeah, he's had a couple really, really good wins. Looking at the fights against John Lineker and Montel Jackson, those losses a little bit disappointing, but understandable. You know, John Lineker just peppered him with big shot after big shot, and Brian Kelleher really displayed toughness in that fight. You know, he really showed us, look, this guy ain't just going to put me out. He took a lot of big strikes, and eventually, I think it was really towards the end of that third round when it was too much. John Lineker was able to get it done. Montel Jackson, now that was a little bit of a shock. Montel Jackson caught him real quick and was able to sink in a Darce choke. That was a little bit surprising. Since then, roughly, that was about a year ago, could be 13 months now. So we haven't seen Brian Kelleher since then. And I think this is a tough return fight. Now, can Brian Kelleher win this fight? The answer is yes. Do I think he's going to win? No, it's a tough one. It's really tough. I feel Brian Kelleher wins sometimes through toughness as well. And if he can't out-tough you, then he's really got to rely on his grappling. And O'Day Osborne has shown us he's not just going to be laid on. You know, he's a threat off of his back. I think if this fight's kept on the feet, O'Day Osborne can really display his striking. And if it goes to the mat, I think O'Day Osborne could potentially get a submission win. Now, I really like Brian Kelleher. I like his YouTube channel too. So if he can prove me wrong, all credit to Brian Kelleher. But the Jamaican sensation, man, I really like this guy. I think he has huge potential. And I think we may see that in the debut. So I'm going to take O'Day Osborne via TKO in round number 1. And we take a look at some odds. O'Day Osborne, minus 130, minus 125, minus 135, which seems correct. Brian Kelleher, plus 105, plus 110. You know, it's not a bad bet if you're on Brian Kelleher. A slight underdog. He has got more experience as well. But O'Day Osborne, minus 120, he could show huge potential in this debut. And to catch him at, you know, just over evens, it's not a bad bet either. I think it's a playable line. 2 really good opening lines on this card. Moving into the next one, we have Tim Elliott versus Bullet Askarov. We'll start with Tim Elliott. So Tim Elliott comes into this fight 4 wins, 7 losses inside the UFC. I think it's fair to say Tim Elliott is a veteran of the 125 division. He's fought a lot of great competition over the years. And Tim's just this guy who has crazy, unorthodox style. You know, he's all over the place. He's cutting all kinds of angles. Just so unpredictable. Unpredictability, 10 out of 10 for Tim Elliott. He's crazy in there. His grappling is also very decent. You know, you look at his contest against Demetrius Johnson. He was able to grapple in that fight very, very well. But then you look at him against Ben Nguyen and Davison Figueiredo most recently, where Tim Elliott doesn't really look like the old Tim Elliott. So for Tim Elliott, man, I think he's going to be the same type of guy. He's going to get in there. He's going to create 10s of 20s of different kinds of angles. He's going to be crazy. He's going to try and hurt Askarov. He may get hurt himself. Who knows? Tim Elliott is going to be Tim Elliott. I will say, though, he does have to scramble well in this fight. Brandon Moreno was able to scramble against Askarov, and that created a lot of issues. So for Tim Elliott to be successful in the grappling, I do think he needs to scramble well and potentially end up on top. Now, the opponent, Askarov, comes into this fight 0 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw inside the UFC. Prior to the UFC, I believe he was 10-0. All 10 fights ending with a finish. So from the UFC debut, that was the first time he went 3 rounds. Now, this is a Russian, so already we know he has that Sambo-based style. We can see that prior to the UFC. We can see that in the debut against Brandon Moreno. I do think he was lucky to get a draw in that fight. I did take him in that fight, and honestly, man, I really think Brandon Moreno should have won that fight 29-28. But speaking about the fight for itself, I think Askarov showed us good moments. But he clearly fought against a guy who was able to scramble and not give him what he wants, which is top position. Askarov looks very good when he's on top. When he's on the bottom, not too good. He doesn't look too good off the bottom. Obviously, he'll try to attempt to submit you there, but ultimately he does want to be on top. Now, if you can keep getting back to your feet too, that's going to cause a lot of issues. We saw that in the fight against Brandon Moreno. Stylistically, I think it's a good matchup for both guys. Like I said earlier, Tim Elliot has grappled with the likes of Demetrius Johnson. So to sit here and say Askarov's going to completely out-grapple him, dominate him in the grappling, I think that's a little far-fetched. I think Tim Elliot can compete there. Now, I also think Askarov, if he's made to stand with Tim Elliot, I think he can compete there too. So wherever this fight goes, I think it's going to be fun to watch. I think both guys are going to compete. But I just think Askarov is a little more stable as a fighter, you know. Like being unpredictable is a good thing. But I feel like when I watch Tim Elliot, I feel like he doesn't even know what he's going to do. So it's like it's unpredictable, but it's unpredictable to Tim Elliot too. Sometimes that works, and other times you get hurt, like Davis and Figueiredo hurt him and then was able to get his own submission. So I just think Askarov a little more composed, and I think that's going to help him in this fight. So I'm going to take Askarov via decision. And we take a look at the odds. Askarov minus 125, minus 130. Tim Elliot plus 100, plus 105. I think that line is perfect, man. I would slightly favour Askarov purely down to composure and being able to grapple. Tim Elliot can grapple, but gets a little crazy in there. Brandon Moreno also gets crazy in there, but you feel danger with that craziness, you know, especially recently. You look at Brandon Moreno against Kelleher France, such measured danger. Tim Elliot, a little more crazy. So I'm going to take Askarov. Aleska Camur versus Justin Ledet. We'll start with Camur. So Camur comes into this fight 5-0 as a pro, making his UFC debut by way of the Contender Series. If you haven't seen that Contender Series fight, please go watch it. Try and go watch that fight. Really, really impressive performance from Camur. Was able to get a flying knee, then some ground and pound to finish that fight. There was a few flying knees on Dana White's Contender Series for that whole season. But this one was beautiful. Beautiful flying knee. Transitioned into ground and pound. It was beautiful. So taking a look at Camur, just a really powerful guy. Very athletic, obviously. A very strong wrestler. Good top control. Vicious ground and pound. And even standing. You know, this guy has power. Moves really quick for the division he's in. I see potential. I see potential in this Serbian. I like everything I see, man. He's powerful. He's a grappler. He's a wrestler. Flying knee. I like it. Now the opponent, Justin Ledet, comes into this fight 3 wins, 2 losses inside the UFC. Started his career at heavyweight. I believe those first 3 fights are at heavyweight. Since those 3 fights, he stepped down to 205. And he's been dominated by Rakic and Johnny Walker. Now, I know both of those guys are really, really good fighters. But it's not looking good for Justin Ledet, you know. I was actually at the Rakic fight live in Germany. And like I said, Rakic is a great fighter, right? Most of you, looking back now, would expect that win to happen, that performance to happen for Rakic. But being there live, and I remember the odds were very close. Justin Ledet was just never in that fight. Never from the first moment to the last moment. He was never in that fight. And you look at the fight against Johnny Walker. Now, that was a much quicker fight. But same thing. Justin Ledet was never in that fight. So I don't know if it's because he stepped down to 205. There doesn't really seem to be much aggression from Justin Ledet, much poise to his game. So it's going to be interesting to see this fight, because Camur is a really aggressive guy, really powerful, and he's a good grappler, like I said. So for Justin Ledet to win this fight, man, he's going to have to gain some respect real quick. He's going to have some real pop to his punches. Potentially look to grapple himself to show Camur he's not going to be dominated there. It's a tough fight for me to really see Justin Ledet have much success in this fight. Now, Camur is only 5-0 as a pro. You know, he does have to experience adversity and that kind of stuff. Maybe it happens here, maybe it doesn't. But Camur is fighting out of a good camp. Strong style fight team, which has Stipe Miocic. You know, so surely he's getting in good rounds with some good guys. He's looking really good inside the octagon, and I'd expect him to have a good performance against a guy I feel is really a stepping stone, or has been a stepping stone so far at 205. So I'm going to take Camur via TKO in round number 1. And we take a look at some odds. Camur minus 120, Justin Ledet plus 100. It's kind of nice to see a bit of respect going into Justin Ledet. Like I said, 2 fights at 205, and he's been completely dominated in both of those fights. Granted, the opponent is very, very good, but how good is Camur? We don't know. Minus 120, I'm willing to take him, man. He looks really good on the Contender Series. In other fights prior to that, he looks powerful. And like I said, he has a good camp behind him. I'd assume the preparation has been good. And I'm expecting him to have a good performance. So minus 120, I'm willing to take a shot. Moving into the next one, we have Chas the Scrapper Skelly versus Grant the Prophet Dawson. We'll start with Skelly. So Chas Skelly comes into this fight 7 wins, 4 losses inside the UFC. Basically a lifelong grappler. Started wrestling at 5 years old, kept it up. Later transitioned into MMA, became a good BJJ practitioner. Taking a look at his stand-up ability, you know, not really much of a change over the years when it comes to standing and striking. You know, it's in his name. He's going to scrap until you're in the clinch. Then he's going to look to use his wrestling. Then he's going to look to use his BJJ. So his striking really isn't too dangerous. It's his wrestling, you know, his lifelong mentality of, I'm a better wrestler than you. I'm going to submit you. That's what the Scrapper is looking to do. So looking at a few of his fights here and there, I'm sure some of you remember the fight against Jason Knight. He was pounded out late in that fight. His, you know, just his willingness to accept the bottom position in that fight it wasn't right. Against Bobby Moffett, you know, half out, half in with the choke. Legit finish, I still feel. Against Jordan Griffin, which was his most recent fight, he got a win in that fight. Really, really close fight. But Jordan Griffin choosing to grapple and choosing to do a couple things here and there in that fight really was the reason why Skelly came out on top in that fight. But yeah, with Chas Skelly, man, he's looking to do the same thing pretty much all the time. He's going to grapple with you. Whether you sub him or ground and pound him like Jason Knight did, he's looking to be the better grappler inside the octagon with you. Now, the opponent, Grant Dawson, comes into this fight 2-0 inside the UFC. Grant Dawson is also a lifelong wrestler, a lifelong grappler, just like Skelly. So, stylistically, I'm already liking this matchup. Taking a look at Grant's fights inside the UFC, dominated both guys pretty much. Julian Erosa didn't have an answer. Mike Trezano ended up tapping. So, Grant Dawson is looking to implement his life inside the octagon. And his life has been grappling, just like Chas Skelly. So we have two guys who, at one point, they're going to be looking across the octagon at each other, knowing exactly what each other want to do. I want to end up on top. I want to be the guy dictating the pace on the feet and the pace when it comes to grappling. So both guys, you know, it's a mirror match. Skelly is the older guy. He's 9 years older, I believe. He does have more experience. But Grant Dawson isn't just going to fold in there. You know, I see real hunger from this guy's game. I see him speak in interviews, really hungry. So whoever wins this fight, credit to them. I'm going to have to make a pick. It's a tough pick to make. And I'll be honest with you guys, I have been a little bit back and forth. I think Skelly probably has got the better jiu-jitsu, but I think Grant Dawson has that hunger, that determination. And I think he's going to be fighting a guy who is basically the same guy as him. You know, Grant Dawson is looking at a guy who is a wrestler and maybe a better BJJ player, but Grant Dawson has the hunger, you know, and I think that's going to be the difference here. I think Grant's going to be the one ending up on top and basically pounding out Skelly. So I'm going to take Grant Dawson via TKO in round number 2. And we take a look at some odds. Whoa, I did not expect those odds. That's a little off. I'll be honest, man. I've been back and forth in this fight. And to see minus 250, minus 270 on Grant Dawson, I think it's fair to say there's a bit of hype around this kid. Skelly plus 230, plus 210. It wouldn't be the worst underdog you'll take in 2020. I can assure you that. But yeah, Grant Dawson minus 250. I probably put that in one play at the very most. Moving into the next one, we have Nasrat versus Drew Dober. We'll start with the German, Nasrat. He comes into this fight 3-1 inside the UFC, fighting out of TriStar. And most of you call this guy the mini Gastelum. And I can see why. He looks exactly like Kelvin Gastelum. And it's a good thing to know that, well, in my opinion, anyway, it's a good thing to know his ability inside the octagon isn't far from Kelvin Gastelum's. You know, Nasrat is a very, very good fighter. Sets a very high pace in his fights. He's a very decent grappler. He's got beautiful power, good technique in his stand-up abilities too. I was live in Germany when he fought my boy Mark Diakisi. And man, I was surprised, amazed, and impressed with Nasrat. You know, I was hoping all those emotions was going to be for the bone crusher Diakisi, but man, Nasrat really opened my eyes. You know, I was watching that fight in the flesh, and I was just amazed by this guy who was setting such a high pace, looking so crisp, his technique, you know, just, oh man, I'm remembering it all now. And Nasrat is a guy I strongly believe in. And then you look at Nasrat's performance against Joaquim Silva, you know, just beautiful, completely destroyed him. Yeah, Nasrat is a guy I really believe in. I think this guy has huge potential. He's good everywhere. He's really, really good everywhere. Now, the opponent, Drew Dober, comes into this fight 7 wins, 5 losses, 1 no contest inside the UFC. I believe he's training out of Elevation Fight Team, which is a very, very decent camp at the moment. And Drew Dober, man, just a very experienced guy in mixed martial arts. At 14 years old, he was a 2-time amateur Muay Thai champion. Later on in his teens, he was a wrestler. Just over his whole UFC career so far, I believe he's proven he's a very, very good fighter, very, very well-rounded. He's not just a guy you're going to just step over. Just get in there, you're done, we're on to the next one. Drew Dober is a very, very talented guy. He's the type of guy that I would rate 7 out of 10, like anywhere the fight goes. He's like an Arnold Allen. He's 7 out of 10 anywhere. Boxing, kickboxing, only kicking, grappling, setting a pace everywhere. Drew Dober is very strong. Now, it sucks to make a pick in this fight because I haven't picked against Drew Dober in 6 fights. I'll show you guys a picture from my Tapology. I'm always picking Drew Dober, and I'm a strong believer in Nasrat too. So two of my favourite fighters, two guys I really believe in, are fighting each other, and it sucks that I've got to make a pick. But the bottom line for me is, I think both of these guys are going to match each other wherever they go. I think Nasrat fights at a real high pace. I think Drew Dober has shown us I can fight at a high pace. Both of these guys can crack real hard. Both of these guys can grapple. You know, it's near impossible to decide who's going to win this fight. So by no means is this my most confident pick. But I'm going to have to pick against Drew Dober for the first time in like 6 fights. I just think Nasrat can match him. He can match him with a high pace. He can grapple. I think it's going to be very close. But I just think Nasrat could potentially shock us again. I think he has huge potential. I think Drew Dober is also showing us improvements every single fight. But yeah, I'm going to stick with Nasrat. And like I said, man, this fight here is so tough for me to predict. I'm a true believer for both guys. So if I'm wrong, fair enough. But I'm going to take Nasrat via decision. And we take a look at some odds. Now that's insane. That's insane. Minus 300 for Nasrat. Plus 250. Plus... wow. That's crazy to me. I was expecting to see like minus 150 or something for Nasrat, but I'm looking at plus 340, plus 330. You just can't touch that line, unless you're going for Drew Dober, or unless you're just completely minted and you have all the money in the world and you just want to bet on Nasrat because you think he's going to win. Fair enough. But yeah, that line's insane. Nasrat, man, the potential I see in him, hopefully that shines and that kind of comes through in the fight, and we get a true reflection on minus 330. But for the most part, man, I see both of these guys really pushing each other, really competing against each other, and just matching each other, man. Both of these guys are great. I'll take Nasrat, but minus 330, I won't be betting on it. Andre Touchy Fili versus Sadiq Super, or should I say Super Sadiq Yusuff. Now this is a very decent matchup. We'll start with Touchy Fili. Andre Touchy Fili comes into this fight 8 wins, 5 losses inside the UFC. Another guy who I'm a true fan of. You know, despite the record 8-5, you know, it doesn't make him seem like a world beater. But these guys don't have to be world beaters for you to be fans of them. You know, I really like this guy. Andre Fili had a troubled upbringing, didn't have the best childhood. You could read into it online if you want to go and see what I'm talking about. But the facts are, he found Team Alpha Male, and from that moment, you know, his life changed. He became a better person. His troubles kind of left him. They'll always be there with him. You know, you go through some stuff, it stays with you, but it's life. You know, you move on. You become a different person every day. And Touchy Fili turned into a very good kickboxer. This guy loves to stand. He loves to trade technique for technique. Very good movement. Always mixing up his attacks. You know, not the most powerful guy out there, but you look at his finish over Shaman Moraes, and that's beautiful. You know, that's all technique, and the power comes with the technique. You know, you don't have to be this Francis Ngannou type monster to put people out. It's about drilling technique every day. And we see it. We see it in Touchy Fili's career. Sometimes the performance isn't too great. But for the most part, he's always down to trade technique for technique. He's a striker at heart. And like I said, man, he mixes up his attacks very well. Now, the opponent, Sadiq Yusuff, this guy is 3-0 inside the UFC. And just like Fili, Yusuff is a very, very good kickboxer. Had an amazing performance on the Contender Series. And the performances inside the UFC are just as good. They're just as good as the Contender Series. And that's all we can ask for. When we see a guy fight on the Contender Series, wear his heart on his sleeve, all we can ask for now is keep it up in the biggest show. You know, look to do the same thing. Look to impress us. And Sodiq Yusuff has done exactly that. Now, I'm not saying it's been perfect, because there has been a couple moments with Shaman Moraes and with Benitez that he was hurt a couple times in those fights. But the facts are he still came out on top. He still looked to finish the fight. Fought through adversity. It's fair to say Sodiq Yusuff has fought through adversity in his 3 UFC fights. So another fight, man, where just like the last one with Nasrat and Drew Dober, this is a tough one because I really like Andre Fili, and I think Sodiq Yusuff has really proven a lot so far inside the UFC. Both guys mirror each other because they're kickboxers, but the difference for me, you know, this time I do feel a difference, unlike the Nasrat and Drew Dober fight. I think this time it's power. And that power lies with Sodiq. I think that's going to be the difference. Both guys are going to look good in there. But after 5 minutes of the first round, you remember that clatter that the low calf kick landed on Fili. You remember a couple moments from Sodiq, more so than Fili. That's the type of fight I feel we're going to get. It hurts to pick because I like Andre Fili. I pick him quite often. But yeah, Sodiq Yusuff, we can't deny this guy is a very powerful kickboxer. And I think he's going to have a good time against Fili. Could be wrong. And if I am wrong, credit to Fili. He's one of my favourites. But I think the difference in this fight is the power of Sodiq Yusuff. So I'm going to take Sodiq Yusuff via decision. And we take a look at some odds. Yeah, those odds are definitely back to being normal. Sodiq Yusuff minus 130, Andre Fili plus 110, plus 105, plus 115. Yeah, it's perfect. You know, we have a kickboxing battle on our hands here, and it's, you know, how do you pick the difference in this kickboxing battle? Personally, I feel the difference is power. If Fili kicks Yusuff and then Yusuff kicks Fili and both guys connect 100%, I think if you watch both of those moments, I think there's going to be a difference in who feels that strike more. Let me know in the comments though. You know, what's the difference in this fight for you? Let's get engaging. For me, it's the power. And at minus 135, minus 130, I'm willing to put that in at least 2 parlays for Sodiq Yusuff. Alright homies, we're going to do a quick smoke break and then I'm going to get into the rest of this card. So if you smoke, now's the time to spark up. But the chances are you probably already sparked up if you smoke. So yeah, cool. This is my friendly reminder too. For anyone who hasn't voted on the main event on the community tab, if you want your say in that vote, go and vote. So this is the vote right now. We have 350 votes. 75% are coming in on Conor McGregor, 25% Donald Cerrone. If you want your say, make sure you vote. And as always, I'm going to stick the final result on the next video, and then we'll continue to do that all year. Man, I'm just so excited MMA's back. It's been a few days, you know, after Christmas, that's when it's really started to sink in. Like, something's missing. Now it's back. I feel good. If anyone plays PUBG on Xbox, if you want anyone to play with at any time, drop your gamer tag down below, because PUBG, that's my game right now. If anyone's playing PUBG on Xbox, let me know. We're duo, we're squad, whatever you want, because that is what I'm bashing at the moment. Like, just getting through the days, watching tape obviously as well, making predictions, breaking down fights, but PUBG has saved me a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Okay, let's get into this card. Macy, the future Barber versus Roxan, the happy warrior Modafferi. We'll start with Macy Barber. So Macy Barber comes into this fight 3-0 inside the UFC, training out of Rufus Sport MMA, and she's pretty much a lifelong mixed martial artist. She's been training since like 5 years old or something crazy like that. She's a very strong wrestler, powerful ground and pound. On the feet, measures range very well. She has like almost like a karate stance when she's measuring the range of her opponent. She does that very well. As for her striking, that can improve. It needs to improve. It has improved. But one thing that stands out with Macy Barber is power. Everything she's doing, she's generating real power, whether it's an elbow, a knee, a jab, a kick, a hook. Whatever it is, it's powerful. Real power from Macy Barber. Now, like I said, her striking does need to improve, but right now, I would say she's still one of the best female fighters in the UFC. And obviously, she wants to be the youngest champion in the UFC. It is doable. Her opponent, Roxan Modafferi. We know about this girl. 2-4, I believe, inside the UFC. She is a veteran. You could say she's a veteran of women's MMA. She's fought a lot of good competition over the years. Her style hasn't really changed. You know, it hasn't really changed too much over the years. We know what Roxan wants to do. She wants to get a hold of you, put you up against the fence, look for a takedown, and then look to submit you. Now, on the feet, she can be quite awkward to deal with. You know, she's got that like jerky style where she's dipping her head and being very weird. You know, you kind of think she's gonna shoot for that takedown. You know, when they're standing and you're looking across the octagon at Roxan, you're just seeing this jerky motion, and you're anticipating grappling because that's her style. You know, she's looking to get a hold of you. She wants to submit you. Now, when Roxan Modafferi isn't coming forward and dictating the pace on the feet and dictating her style, she is very ineffective on the feet. So Roxan Modafferi needs to come forward against Macy Barber. This is a decent matchup, I think, for Macy. I think she potentially fought a similar contest in her last fight against Gillian Robertson. I felt Gillian would need to come forward, dictate the pace, and look for a takedown to potentially submit Macy. That's how I felt Gillian would win. Now, obviously, I took Macy Barber. I felt her takedown defense is very good. She's a very good wrestler herself. She could even end up on top. And when opponents look for takedowns against Macy, you know, she's going to punish you. If you can't get the takedown, and now she's stuffing the takedown, she's going to hit you with powerful elbows. And that's what we saw against Gillian Robertson too. So yeah, I'm going to take Macy here. I think it's a similar type of contest that she fought against Gillian. And in all honesty, I don't see Roxan Modafferi being more dangerous than Gillian Robertson on the feet. I wouldn't consider Gillian a striker. We know her as a grappler. And I see the same kind of thing in Roxan. So, yeah, for me, Macy Barber here. So I'm going to take Macy Barber via TKO in round number 2. And we take a look at some odds. The odds are for this one, if I can find them. Oh my, wow. So, yeah, like I said at the start of this recording, I hadn't checked the odds at all. And I said to my fiance, Macy Barber should literally be minus 800. She is going to blow Roxan Modafferi out of the water. And now I'm looking at the odds and she's minus 1,000. Yeah, so obviously unplayable. If you're going to play it, you play a TKO, I'm assuming. That's crazy. But I'm behind it, man. I think it's a similar type of fight that she just fought. And this doesn't seem to be a step up in competition. The only way it would be is if we consider Roxanne Modafferi a veteran, which she is over Gillian Robertson, Roxanne has seen far more. Similar styles, but yeah, Roxanne Modafferi, she's going to need to pull something out of the water, you know, to win this fight, because Macy Barber is a true beast. And by the way, if you haven't seen my edit on Macy Barber, I released a video. Go check that out, please. Moving into the next one, we have Anthony Showtime Pettis versus Diego Ferreira. We'll start with Pettis. So Anthony Pettis comes into this fight, 9 wins, 8 losses inside the UFC. What can we say about Pettis, man? He's a former champion. He's the holder of the Ninja title, which is fair to say, I believe. The TKO over Wonder Boy was unbelievable. Even if you say, you know, he was getting dominated and that was pure luck. Even if it was, he's the holder of the Ninja title. So what can we say about Pettis, man? He's a guy who, you know, he's a class striker. He's a brilliant striker. He's done very good things. Former champion. But for the last, especially for the last 3-4 years, I feel like he's a shell of himself. Like a real shell of himself. When I watch him fight, I don't feel determination. I don't feel commitment. I don't feel passion. You know, obviously, no one likes to get hurt, right? No one wants to be hurt inside the octagon. No one wants to get punched in the face, but it's something you agree to do, right? It's something you agree to do because you want to win. You want to be great. You want to elevate yourself in the company, outside the company. You know, this sport is a life. You know, it's a life thing that you commit to. And if you're half in and half out, you know, it's going to show inside the octagon. And I feel it has been showing with Pettis. You know, you look at the loss to Dustin Poirier. Now, I believe the odds were very close in that fight. I took Poirier, and to see Pettis quit the way he did, you know, it was a little bit disappointing. Now, obviously, like I just said, no one wants to get hurt, right? So if the rib completely snapped or something horrible happened and he feels like he needs to be done, that's something he decides. You look at the fight against Tony Ferguson, where it was a broken hand. We see many times guys fight with broken hands and there's no quit. You look at a guy like Paul Felder. You remember that spinning fist to Mike Perry, and he caught the forearm and completely broke the forearm, but he was still throwing it. You know, that's the level of determination and passion that Paul Felder is showing inside the octagon, and I don't feel like we're getting that from Pettis at the moment. Now, obviously, he's a class striker. You know, no one's gonna take that away from Pettis. He could fuck me up. He could fuck anyone up who's listening to this podcast. But when I watch him fight, I just see a shell of who he was. Pettis is still a good guy though. I like him. He's a good striker. Now the opponent, Diego Ferreira, comes into this fight 7 wins, 2 losses inside the UFC. A black belt in BJJ. Real nasty jiu-jitsu. However, this guy's striking has evolved really well. You're seeing it fight by fight. And when I watch this guy fight, I feel way different emotion when I watch Pettis fight. When I watch Diego fight, I feel poise. I feel threat. I feel passion, determination. I feel the things that you should feel when you watch someone step inside to the octagon. Now, you only have to look at his most recent fights. So, this is also a guy who lost to Dustin Poirier. Now, he didn't quit. Dustin Poirier TKO'd him. It was horrible. But just look at some of Diego Ferreira's recent performances. You look at the fight against Jared Gordon, where he was able to get it done in the first round. You look at the way he dismantled both of the Russians, Kabalov and Taizamov. You know, Diego Ferreira looked like a man possessed against Taizamov, man. Just had Taizamov backpedaling, just hitting him with nasty strikes. And Diego Ferreira can always fall back to his foundation, which is jiu-jitsu. And he has nasty jiu-jitsu. So I think this fight will be contested on the feet, and I do think there will be some grappling here and there. Is it a good fight for Pettis? There's obviously more tougher fights. He's had tougher fights. If this was like 2015, I'd probably pick Pettis. And I'm not saying Pettis can't win. Anything can happen inside the octagon. But what I feel when I watch both of these guys fight, I feel different things. I just feel more threat, more poise from Diego Ferreira. He feels more committed to this life. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Diego Ferreira. Like I said, if this was a few years ago, this may be a completely different story I'm trying to tell. But as of right now in 2020, I feel both of their careers are going in different directions, you know? So I'm going to take Diego Ferreira via decision. And we take a look at some odds. Man, Anthony Pettis plus 200. That's crazy that it's that high. I mean, the story I tell, you could say, well, that's why he's plus 200. You know, he's just not about fighting. You don't feel that from him, but he can turn it on. And you see that against Wonderboy. It only takes 5 seconds or 1 second for Pettis to show the real Pettis that we know, and it could be over. So plus 200 could be a good bet, but minus 250 Diego Ferreira, I'll probably play it once. But minus 250, it's deep. It's deep. But I am sticking with Diego Ferreira. Claudia Gladina Gadelha versus Alexa Grasso. This is a good fight. We'll start with Claudia Gadelha. She comes into this fight 6 wins, 4 losses inside the UFC. A very respected fighter in women's MMA. She's fought a lot of great competition over the years. Primarily a BJJ practitioner. She's a 2nd degree black belt, so that's the level of her jiu-jitsu. As for her striking, that has evolved. That has evolved over the years. Her technique has become finer. You know, she doesn't rely on power too much when she's standing now, rather technique. The opponent, Alexa Grasso, comes into this fight 3 wins, 3 losses inside the UFC. Primarily a boxer inside the octagon. Her striking is where she's most dangerous. You look at her performance against Carolina. That performance was nothing short of excellent. Like literally 10 out of 10 for a striking performance, man. I believe she landed... it could have been thrown over 300 strikes or landed 300. It was something crazy. But I'm sure a lot of you remember that. She looked like a woman possessed. Just amazing. Amazing performance. Against Carla, I mean, the takedown defense wasn't the best. But I don't feel like that was the reason why she lost that fight. I feel... If anyone can remember, in the 3rd round, Alexa Grasso was able to hurt Carla Esparza, but then she didn't pour it on. There was no instinct to kill. You know, she couldn't see that Carla was hurt, or if she did see that Carla was hurt, the mindset wasn't right. The mindset at that moment was still, I have to make sure I don't get taken down. But at that moment, that shouldn't be the mindset. The mindset should be, I need to be Alexa Grasso, the girl who performed so amazingly against Carolina. I now have Carla hurt. Let me pour the pressure on. At that moment, we don't worry about takedown defense. So with Alexa, I feel his takedown defense, you know, isn't the best. And that's maybe why she didn't pour the pressure on in the 3rd round against Carla. But moments like that, you know, in a fight, they make you better. You go away, you reanalyze what happened, you see what happened, and you lived what happened. You know, you was a part of what was happening. So when you go back and watch it, you know, you feel what you feel, you know what you did, and then training becomes a little bit different. You just become a better fighter. That's what happens when you lose. Now, am I saying she's going to go out there and stuff every single takedown from Claudia Gadelha? No, I'm not. Claudia Gadelha, like I said, has fought a lot of good competition. She has very good grappling. Now, if you can keep it on the feet against Claudia, I would expect Alexa Grasso to have more success there. You know, like I said, that is where she's dangerous. She's a striker. So we're faced with, well, if Carla could take her down, will Claudia take her down? That's what we have to decide here. I don't think Claudia is as relentless as Carla. I think Claudia suffers a little bit more with her conditioning. And I don't think Claudia is as good of a wrestler as Carla. Now, it would only take one takedown for Claudia to get a submission. I believe Claudia took down Carolina once and it was done. So it could just take one takedown. But as far as I'm concerned, man, if Alexa Grasso has become a better fighter since that loss, then she should win this fight. If it stays on the feet, I would expect her to have a lot of success against Claudia. So for those reasons, I'm going to take Alexa Grasso via decision. And we take a look at some odds. We have minus 105, minus 110. We have plus 100 now on Alexa Grasso. Claudia Gadelha minus 115, minus 110. So yeah, the odds are very, very similar. It's basically a pick'em. I can kind of see why Alexa Grasso is slightly pouring over to the underdog side. It is the takedown defense that you would worry about. But Claudia hasn't got the best conditioning. So if there's one or two takedowns and Claudia can't get it done, then it could turn into a conditioning battle where Alexa's able to keep it on the feet and win that way. So it's a very tough fight to predict. Classic striker versus grappler. But I'm going to take the striker this time. Moving into the next one, we have Alexy, the Boa Constrictor Oleinik versus Maurice, the Croquet Boss Greene. Or is it Crochet? I believe. Crochet. We'll start with Alexy Oleinik. So Alexy comes into this fight 6 wins, 4 losses inside the UFC. I believe he's hugely underrated still as a grappler with 44 submission wins over his whole career. So, you know, some people may say, oh, that's the guy that got the Ezekiel, but they may not know he actually has 44 submission wins over his whole career. So to say Alexy Oleinik's a good grappler, maybe that's an understatement. He's a very, very good grappler. Multiple Ezekiel chokes over his whole career. A couple, I believe, now inside the UFC. And to be honest, man, Alexy Oleinik has been a good watch inside the UFC. Like, he has been decent to watch, man. Just not really a dangerous guy on the feet, but is still able to get it done with the Ezekiel chokes. You know, he's been a decent watch. The only problem is, Alexy Oleinik has been fighting for, man, it must be over 20 years. At least 20 years. If not, just over 20 years. You know, he's an old man. He's slow. He isn't dangerous standing. His chin has been cracked one too many times. You know, and that's the problem here. Alexy Oleinik is fighting against time. That's the only problem here. The opponent, Maurice Greene, comes into this fight 3 wins, 1 loss inside the UFC. A BJJ practitioner and a very rangy kickboxer. So Maurice Greene has also been a decent watch. I've nailed all 4 of his fights so far in the UFC. The debut was very impressive to see the triangle choke off his back. Jeff Hughes was a decent rematch. He was able to get a win in the rematch. Maurice Greene looked very good against Junior Albini. Man, was able to get that fight done in the first round. Very beautiful kickboxing in that fight. Ran into a bit of trouble against Pavlovich, but, you know, there's no shame there. There's absolutely no shame losing to a guy like that. Pavlovich is very dangerous, very quick with his hands for heavyweight too. Very quick. So yeah, this is a decent match. This is a decent matchup. Alexy Oleinik versus Maurice Greene. You would imagine for Alexy Oleinik to win this fight, it would be to get a submission. For Maurice Greene, I simply think if he keeps this fight standing, he could potentially get it done via TKO. You look back at the Albini one and it looked good. You look at Pavlovich, not so good, but understandable. I don't think Alexy Oleinik's going to be tagging Maurice Greene. Alexy Oleinik will try, which will most likely be the downfall for him in that fight. I think he's going to try and hurt Maurice Greene, potentially get close, look to clinch, and that's where Maurice Greene's going to be dangerous. So for those reasons, I'm going to take Maurice Greene via TKO in round number 1. And we look at some odds. I'm a little surprised that those odds are so close. You know, Maurice Greene could go in there, maybe not as impressive as Walt Harris, but when it's all said and done, you know, you could be looking at a performance that's like minus 250. Obviously, like I said, Alexy Oleinik, in my opinion, is an underrated grappler. So if he can prove me wrong and pull off another Ezekiel choke or something crazy, credit to him, you know, massive credit, because he's an old man. He's slow, his chin has been cracked, and we pretty much know how he's going to win. You know, the blueprint has been written on how to beat him. You simply keep it standing. He's tough as nails, obviously. We've seen him take some damage and not go away. And then we've seen him, you know, take a couple big strikes from over him and that's it. Or Walt Harris, where he gets it done very quickly. Maurice Greene, I feel, will bounce back in this fight. And at minus 130, I'm willing to take a shot. Alright, homies. Co-main event time. We have Holly, the preacher's daughter, Holm, versus Raquel, Rocky, Pennington. We'll start with Holly Holm. So Holly comes into this fight, 5 wins, 5 losses now inside the UFC. Primarily a boxer, evolved into a very good kickboxer. The highlight of her career would be the high kick against Ronda Rousey, which completely shook the world. Since then, she's fought 7 times and lost 5 of those fights. So, you know, slowly declining fight by fight. Same type of thing with Anthony Pettis. You know, I put Holly Holm and Anthony in the same kind of category. You know, they're great fighters. They're very talented. You're never going to take that away from them. But I'm seeing a shell. You know, I'm seeing like a ghost of who they really are. I see it now and then. You know, for 2 rounds, Holly was fighting very well against Cyborg. After 10 minutes, Holly was 2 rounds up. And then Cyborg wins the 3rd, 4th and 5th. Now, I took Cyborg. A lot of people took Cyborg. So I'm glad that Cyborg came on strong and started to take over. But prior to that fight, if you said to me, Holly Holm is going to fade towards the end, I would have said I felt maybe Cyborg would be the one fading, seeing as she's putting a lot of power out there in everything she does. After 20 minutes, I would assume Cyborg is the one who's fading. But it wasn't. It wasn't. It was Holly. After 10 minutes, she didn't want to circle anymore. She didn't want to move anymore. And now she's starting to eat powerful shots. So it's the same type of thing, man. Holly is a great fighter. And you're never going to take away the high kick. You're never going to take away great moments. But since that win, she's beat Beth Correa and Megan Anderson. So fight by fight, Holly is slowly declining. The opponent, Raquel Pennington, comes into this fight 7-4 inside the UFC. Primarily a boxer, also inside the octagon. And she's also become a very good kicker. And she's a decent grappler. So, in most ways, I feel like this is a mirror match. And this is a rematch, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know. Holly won the first fight. But yeah, this is a mirror match. I think both girls recently destroyed by Nunes. Both girls like to box. Both girls are very good kickers. If we had to pick who's the better kicker, would probably say Holly Holm. But that dog-like mentality of Raquel Pennington in that fight against Irene Aldana, if anyone can remember, she just bit down on that mouthpiece, came forward, started landing her own low calf kick, and just, you know, she had Aldana in the 3rd round accepting bottom position for like 3 minutes, going for a calf slicer. So that's the type of fight Raquel fought against Aldana. You know, she hurt Aldana in that fight because Aldana would not have accepted bottom position for so long. So like I say, most ways I feel this is a mirror match. Both girls can box and both girls can kick. I would say Holly has better movement over 15 minutes, but the dog-like mentality from Raquel can counteract that movement. And especially if Holly takes a couple shots and doesn't feel like she wants to be in there anymore, it could really take over for Raquel. That's what I'm feeling. If this was 3 or 4 years ago, I'm probably making a different pick. And I'll be honest with you, a strong part of me is telling myself, regardless of the decline, you should be picking Holly Holm here. But I just can't do it. I really think, the decline, age, it's a real thing. And that's what's hurting Holly at the moment. Since that head kick, it hasn't gone great. And it's going to take a lot to beat Raquel, because Raquel's a dog. She's going to come forward, she's going to box. And I feel like Raquel is more in the sport. So for those reasons, I'm going to take Raquel via decision. And we take a look at some odds. Very close. Raquel Pennington, plus 105, plus 110, plus 115. Holly, minus 130. I completely understand it. It's like you want Holly to be a -2, and you feel like she should be. But then you realise, since the head kick, how it's gone. And then you realise you're in 2020 now. And she's like, I think she's about 38 or something like that. And Raquel can box, man. Raquel is a boxer. You only got to see it in the ring name. Raquel Rocky, she wants to box in there. So, yeah, I feel Holly could win this fight. I think Raquel could win this fight. I think the odds are perfect. I think no one really knows who's going to win in there. It's hard to decide. Is it the mentality? Is it the skill? All of these things come into play when someone wins a fight. So it's really hard to pick, but I'm sticking with Raquel. Alright, homies. You know what it is. It's main event time. You got to hit the blunt for the return of the Notorious one. Real quick before we get into the breakdown. Who was Conor fighting when he said this? Leave it in the comments. First person to leave it, I'm going to shout you out. If this was a different time, I would invade his favela on horseback and kill those who were not fit to work. But this is a different time. Leave it in the comments. Who was Conor McGregor fighting? Okay, moving into this fight. Conor the Notorious McGregor versus Donald Cowboy Cerrone. We'll start with Conor McGregor. So he comes into this fight, 9 wins, 2 losses inside the UFC. Primarily a striker inside the octagon. The former 145 and 55 champion. A master of measuring range. A piston for a left hand. One of the most intelligent strikers we've ever seen inside the octagon. It took the toughness and the conditioning of Nate Diaz to beat Conor McGregor. It took the relentless wrestling and conditioning of Khabib to beat Conor McGregor. Regardless of those 2 losses, Conor McGregor is one of the best guys we've seen inside the octagon. Now, my favourite fighter is Khabib. You don't have to be #1 fans of these guys to appreciate their abilities. That's just the truth regarding Conor. He is one of the best guys we've seen inside the octagon. Now, does that make Conor a great guy outside the octagon? No, I'm sure most of us would agree he isn't the best human being, nowhere near it. But I'm simply talking about inside the octagon. Conor is one of the best inside the octagon. Now, the opponent, Donald Cerrone, comes into this fight 23 wins, 10 losses inside the UFC. This will be his 34th UFC fight. So, not just a veteran, this guy's a veteran's veteran, a true fighter. And we've seen it over the years. He's fought everyone. He's fought power punchers, grapplers, technical guys, conditioned fighters. Donald Cerrone has fought everyone. And he can do it all. He can strike, he can kick, he can grapple. His jiu-jitsu is some of the best jiu-jitsu we've seen inside the octagon too. So, looking at this matchup, it's a great matchup. It's interesting that Conor has returned and this fight is scheduled for 170. That's interesting to me. That tells me that Conor McGregor has his mind potentially set on Jorge Masvidal. But he has Donald Cerrone in front of him. This fight's at 170. Both guys are naturally lightweights, and there's no cutting weight here. So this is going to be a really good contest. It's already fair to say, we don't have to dive into too much information to find answers. We know who the better conditioned guy is. We know Donald Cerrone only gets better as the fight goes on. The first round, he starts very slow. The second round looks more like Donald. And now the third round is when Donald starts to realize he's in a fight. Fourth round is phenomenal, usually from Donald. And the fifth round, he looks like he wants to go an extra 5. So that's the type of fighter Donald Cerrone is. Conor McGregor, he's going to be most dangerous in that first round. The first round is when he's most powerful. He has the precision in the same precision in the second and the third, but the power is gone. And especially at 170, it's not going to be the same effect than when he was hitting guys at 145. Chad Mendes was able to be dropped by Conor outside that first round. I don't know if Conor's gonna be able to hurt Donald in the third, the fourth, the fifth. I feel if Conor's gonna win this fight, it's gonna be the first or the second. Now, I think a huge part of this fight, and I'll be completely honest with you guys, I think it really depends on which Donald Cerrone turns up. I think Conor could win this fight regardless of which Donald turns up, but that can be a real telling point in this fight. Is it the Donald Cerrone that is nervous backstage? He always talks about being nervous. Or is it the Donald Cerrone that sees his son in the crowd and now he realizes I love fighting. I'm going in there to fight. I love this. So it's really going to be interesting to see how Donald is walking out to the fight, how he looks, what his eyes are saying to me, his body language, all of this, the first opening 30 seconds, the first 60 seconds, all of this stuff is going to give us answers on how this fight's going to go. Obviously, I feel Donald Cerrone could pretty much beat anyone on his best day, but I think Conor McGregor has proven he can beat anyone on his best day too. So this is a really good fight. But I feel a different type of Conor McGregor in these interviews. I'm watching him speak, listening to him with Ariel, listening to him with the Mac Life most recently too. He seems to be back to his old self. He doesn't seem to be, the Conor after he fought Floyd. He seems to be more humble, more grounded. He wants to. He isn't really trash talking either. And that's because the actions need to be his actions. He can't speak and then fight. I feel like he needs to just fight, and that's what we're going to get from Conor. I'm just seeing humbleness in his interviews, and I think we're going to see that inside the octagon. I think he has been working hard, and I think he's one of the very best at measuring range. And if he can measure range in that first round, I think it's going to be the left hand that wobbles Cowboy, and I think that's going to be it. But yeah, great fight. If Donald can prove me wrong, get out the first, get out the second, massive credit to him. He's a true veteran, Donald Cerrone, and there's no shame in him proving me wrong because he's a killer. He's a legend. But Conor McGregor, I feel, will win this return fight and potentially call out Jorge Masvidal. So I'm going to take Conor McGregor via TKO, and I'm going to take it to happen in round number 1. And we take a look at some odds. Man, I disagree. I think minus 300 is crazy. Plus 250 for Donald is insane. I will say, Donald Cerrone had to weather a storm, right, against Justin Gaethje for that first and second to have a chance in that fight. I feel it's the same type of thing. Conor McGregor is way more measured and technical with his power. So maybe Donald Cerrone prefers that type of fight, He's looking to be technical in there too, not really looking to brawl. but I think Conor McGregor's going to measure the range so well. I think he's going to find Donald Cerrone's head. Minus 300. I mean, if he does it in the first, I guess minus 300 is the right price, but I feel like that's a bit off. It is a little bit off. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments who you're taking, underdogs, all of that good stuff. I'm happy to be back. Peace.